New York. New York.
I'm like, well, then you're not going to soccer.
The magic happens when you can create a shift in perception.
Because society has set us up so much for failure for parents.
So when connection is high, resistance will be low.
Cliques are coming up and they want to be in this clique or that clique.
You should have had boys.
I know.
It really is just about coming back to that relationship.
Good afternoon, Roxy Soxy.
Good afternoon, Tam Tam.
I have been with you in New York City for 2 days, and funnily enough, I have a new accent.
I know, it doesn't sound very
You've
New York.
infected me with this accent. It is English now.
You're supposed to be like, New York, baby, New
Is
York.
that your New York accent? Wait, do it one more time.
New York. New York.
I'm really bad at New York accents.
You are?
Yes.
Okay, so we need to like
I'm gonna have to. It's really bad. But I can do Southern. I can do Australian.
Yes, those are very good.
Yeah.
Those are very good that you
South
have.
African. My parents are like, "Go, who's over there at the door? Go open the park. What are you doing, man?" This is my South African accent.
That might be one of the hardest accents to like listen to and
It's
try to
it's a
hear,
little like
right?
New Zealand, like fish and chips.
A fish and chips.
That's New Zealand.
Okay.
I can just do phrases. I can do full accents. Just the phrase. You're pretty good.
I mean, I try,
You're
like
Southern.
So yeah, well, I am from Texas, honey. I grew up
Do your
with
New
that.
York again.
New York, move the fucking car.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good. I give that to you. I give that to you.
Thank you.
Anyway, so if you don't know, we're in New York, guys. And I have to tell this little story before we introduce our next amazing guest. But Roxy and I are sleeping together. Not sleeping.
Not literally.
Yeah. Sorry. That was just my fantasy. Sorry. Roxy and I are sleeping next to each other in a very old hotel.
Yes.
Because we couldn't get any rooms because there's a G8 summit.
Yeah.
So everything's like $1,000 a night. So we're like, we'll spend $500 a night on the hotel. And Roxy's like, can we do the 450? I'm like, the 450 looks like there might be drug addicts there. So we did the 500. There's no room service, all water.
Nope.
They
Not
would
a
not
drop.
give us water. Anyway, so I'm sleeping next to Roxy, and her husband, David, hi David, because I'm sure you're listening, told me that she snores. And I was nervous because I don't sleep next to my husband a lot of the time because he snores, and so he sleeps in separate beds, and that's why we've stayed married for 12 years, because we get to sleep. I was very nervous about you snoring, and I was like, I'm not going to have my brain cells working on these podcasts because I'm going to be up all night with your going on. So I brought my sound machine. I brought my Calm app, which makes a big noise. I brought my my noise canceling earplugs, and I bought my Bose noise canceling.
You were prepared.
And I put Roxy's pillows to the little. So I propped her head up the first night to make sure she didn't snore. And 3 hours into falling asleep, I woke up with shock horror because I was like, "Is Roxy dead or alive?" Or she left to go party in New York City, and she was still there. Alive. She hadn't left to go party, and she was not snoring.
See, confirmed. Thank you, David. I do not snore at night, even though you do.
Yes. And she seems to be okay that you've been gaslit for the last,
Yes.
10 years.
Oh, don't you worry. I'm putting this on the scorecard. It will not be forgotten.
And you know what? The next day, which was last night, you didn't snore either. So
See?
yeah.
It's 2 out of 2.
It's 2 out of 2.
2 out of 2. It's clean. It's clean. It's
So
easy.
our next guest has got nothing to do with snoring or maybe a bit of gaslighting. Maybe there's gaslighting in there. And we love her so much. We had her on, I think it was just after the pandemic.
Right.
Was it just after?
It was.
And I keep sending all the clips that we have of the assets of her to my husband. And he watches it. He's like, great idea. And then he just does not do what I've asked him to do. So we're going to talk a lot. I think this episode we really wanted to talk about discipline and connecting with your kids as a parent and in your relationships without discipline being like the ultimate goal, trying to find connection without punishment. And also I've learned a lot lately about attachment styles. And I want to talk about attachment styles. I also want to talk about where our attachment styles come from and how they play a role in our parenting. Because I learned that I'm an anxious attacher. Surprise, surprise.
Shocking.
Shocking. Apparently you are an avoidant attacher.
We have to go through all those.
Passive aggressive.
Don't make me pull the text messages out, Miss Tam. Instagram.
Oh, okay. So, Roxy, who do we have on today?
Well, we are so thrilled to welcome back our friend of the podcast. She's an amazing psychologist. She has taught us so much about parenting. We follow her religiously on Instagram because she puts out these videos that are just seem to hit right when we need them. You know, they're just amazing.
Even though husbands don't open them.
Yeah, exactly. But we do.
We do.
We do. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. How are you?
Thank you.
And you flew in all the way here, even though you have some disease on your foot, like something eating away at your ankle.
Right. It's
Some infection.
Yes.
making
Some
walking
staph
around
infection.
New York very interesting.
What happened?
Well, I went, I had a friend come into town from Australia
Yeah.
last week back home, and I was wearing running shoes, so it was fine. It wasn't
Yeah.
like I was in heels going
Right.
for a 4-hour walk. Went for a 4-hour walk, got blisters, normal occurrence. But in the last week, they've become very infected.
This is so
and
great to start the show with.
requires some significant medical intervention. I'm on like 27 antibiotics right now to try.
Isn't it funny how things can just go so badly so fast?
Right, right. And then
Yeah.
I always go to like, what am I meant to learn from this?
Don't exercise.
What's the learning?
I think about that too. Because sometimes you just don't know the lesson.
Yeah. And how is it for you, not to you?
Right.
Yeah.
So what about you?
Well, just today I was working. So I was working, and things were kind of not going right with what,
yes,
the
I was
communications I was having, and things like that. And for a moment, I definitely freaked out. You were sitting right there. I definitely had a freak out moment, but then you put it really, really well.
I
You were
saved
like,
you.
you were
Time
like,
and time again.
exactly. You're like, why are you focusing on that? People go to the moon. It's like, you don't
That's
need
what I
to freak-
said.
Yeah, she did.
Perspective.
Right. And she's
People
like,
are on the
"It's-
moon, you know?
It's fine. And if people like, what you're putting out, they're going to like it, And if they don't, they don't. And it's not the end of the world,
Right.
It's really easy to get caught up in the moment and get all those factors like wrapped around you. And it feels like you're almost being strangled, right? But then it's like, you got to just take a breath and let go. And it's not the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world.
And I feel like that and we can talk about parenting. And I feel like I have a 4-year-old, which I can I've already had a 4-year-old. So my eldest is 9 and I have a 4-year-old. So I've already been a mom of a 4-year-old. Never been a mom of a 9-year-old, turning 10, going through pre-puberty. It's been really rough because I love her so much. And we've talked about this before. She's pulling away and she's quote unquote misbehaving, which I don't believe in those terms. I believe in overwhelmed, overstimulated, scared, frustrated, hormonal. I don't believe in misbehaving. But I'm finding it dependent on where I am emotionally and mentally. I'm finding it really difficult to not, the word is punish or discipline instead of connect. I find it very triggering, the yelling and the slamming the doors and the I hate yous and the you're the worst mom. It breaks my heart. So then I get triggered and I'm like, well, then you're not going to soccer, And she loves soccer. And then she cries and then I cry. It's a shit show over in my house. And then my husband's like, don't do that. And I'm like, don't you undermine me in front of her? So, I mean, most of the time it's good, but like a lot of the time right now it's kind of not, So how do we find connection and not just go straight to punishment?
Well, if there was a formula, which there isn't, but if there was, there would be sort of 2 steps to solving that challenge. The first step would be to figure out from inside of you what about that has like grabbed you. And the trigger did not just come out of thin air.
Right.
The trigger actually has nothing even to do with your child. The trigger has something to do with something that went down in your life, probably when you were 9 or 10, but possibly in your first 6 years where things were formative, the programs were being written, you onboarded messaging, and we grow up bringing all of that forward with us. Because another person could be standing in the room and watching whatever event is playing out with your kid and be like, oh, isn't she so perfectly 9? Like, it's so
Right.
epic. 9 is so epic. Whereas for you...
I wasn't allowed to do that.
see?
I wasn't allowed
And
to
what
slam the
happened-
door and say I hate you.
What would have
Were
happened if you did?
I
Oh,
did it.
I would get in. I would get in massive trouble.
And would you be frightened about that and feel shameful about that? And so now when the door gets slammed and somebody says, I hate you and you're the worst mom ever, your inner 9-year-old is like, oh my God, like I'm going to get in trouble. And you go to guilt and shame. But it has nothing to do with her. And her job, because kids are born into the world, we have it kind of socialized out of us as adults, but kids read energy like they're like masters at it. And so she's like, oh, like she sniffed you and she's like, oh, this one needs a little healing around the issue.
Yes.
Around the issue to
Don't
do
touch
with.
me. She said, don't touch me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's tricky too, because we teach them about body autonomy, right? And we're like, you know, your body is your body. Like you make the call, you know, but when you're trying to like, you know, when things like that are happening, or in the morning when you're trying to get them up,
Give me a hug.
give me a hug. Yeah. How do you do that? You know, like how do you explain that?
First of all, and this sounds contrary to what you've just talked about in terms of autonomy, I wouldn't ask. Because we are meant to be alpha and in the lead. So it's our job to read the room and read the situation and know our kid and be respectful of who they are. And if I'll put it into adult terms. If I'm feeling like I want to connect with my husband and like we just need a minute, if I have to go to him and tell him, tell me you love me.
Right.
Then it's too late. Like I've taken it away from myself and from him because he didn't offer it. By the time I asked for it, you know when you wait till you're too hungry and then
Every
it's
day.
too late. And so then it doesn't matter how much he says I love you then, because it won't be enough because I had to ask for it. So you want to feel like there's this very nurturing hierarchy in place where you offer forward the love and the nurturance without there being sort of this barrier between you and your child. Now, if you know she's pissed and she woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and when she's like that, she really hates it when you come in for a hug, then don't hug her. You can connect with her with your voice, with your eyes, with the other kinds of
I know, and
ways.
everything you're saying is everything that I want to be. So firstly, let's just start there. I just don't, and then that's my own inner child healing. I have my own perfectionism, and our parents, which I've made peace with, and I think a lot of my generation have, your parents do the best that they can with the tools that they have,
100%.
right? And they're just doing the best that they can based on the healing that they're also doing from their parents and their generation. Because I used to get in trouble when I slammed the door, but oh my goodness, well my mom got a brush broken on her butt, you know? So at least each generation seems to be a little bit more evolved when it comes to parenting. But the issue that I find around that is, you know, I get triggered, but I'm also, you know, and your husband too, like our husbands are my husband's 10 years older than me, and same thing. And so they're even more fossilized in their idea of parenting. So how do you make, when I'm trying to do what you're saying, and then you have another parent who's like, no, don't talk to me like that, you know, do this, do that. It causes conflict, right? It causes tension and friction.
So I happen to be an expert on this only because we only ever teach what we have to learn.
Right. I'm always like, do you walk the walk?
Right.
Well, and I'm divorced and remarried, and I really did dance myself out of my first marriage because I didn't know. I would be like, do you know who I am?
Right.
Like, did you read my book?
Know, right? Yeah. I'm like, do you listen to this podcast?
Right.
You listen to others?
Yeah, so don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Because it's challenging. You want to respond. They're your children. You've read all the books and you know all of the things, and then you see the opposite of it happening, and the alarm comes up in you, and you want to pounce all over that. Our job, just as it is with our children, is to get curious with our partners.
Right.
And understand that whatever story has them playing it out that way in their parenting journey is a story that probably would bring you to your knees.
Right.
And when the magic happens when you can create a shift in perception. And so then you see your partner doing that to your child, and you think, oh, like you have compassion and a little bit of softness around it. And I think that there are moments, and it's not every moment or they lose their potency, but there are moments when we are meant to step in and say no. and I got this. So that we excuse them from the circumstance. My own therapist calls it great mother or great father energy, where, like, you know, when you step in, it's kind of like Gandalf and the staff and slammed into the ground, and thou shalt not pass. Like, nobody messes with that energy. And it's a sparingly used thing. There are times when we say, this will not stand.
Right. And you do that with your partners in certain moments.
Yeah, and if the child happens to be standing there, because it's not all the time.
It's a fine line, right? Because you don't want to undermine them within it. Because I think I learned that from you, or maybe someone like you is just as good as you. But you got to be really careful to not be a team in parenting, because then the child feels like they can go to one when you know. And I don't want her. I want her to feel. I want our kids to know that what we say together, and our rules are our rules together, and our boundaries are our boundaries together. But sometimes when you're parenting differently because you have different traumas and you have different ways you were raised, it's hard to do that in the moment. We came up with the word banana. Like, if we see the other person,
I'm working to make the connection.
Maybe we'll just say peach. I don't know. So strawberries. But
you came up with that word in your word. I understand.
So that when we're in a situation where he's being a bit of a butthole, or I'm being a bit of a butthole, like, we can look at each other and someone can say, like, strawberries or peach or banana or whatever it is, and the other person hopefully can go, okay, I'm not doing what we talked about.
Like a jolt.
Right. Don't know if it's working.
My husband now, so we're a blended family, and he lives in my home. His children are adults, but my children have been at home since he became part of our family. And I remember my now 19-year-old son, who was probably 17 at the time, and he's very clever and very smart, but, like, not always in the moment. And he had gone upstairs to use the bathroom and noticed that the door handle was partially hanging off the door, and went and used the bathroom anyways and closed the door. And so there was this whole situation that he couldn't get out of the bathroom,
Right. And
the door
told him.
right, and the door handle is, like, now partially on the ground, and it's all a developing kind of challenge. And my husband goes up and he's like, "Are you for real?"
Right.
Like, the door handle was partially off the door.
And
You get A+ at school.
Right.
And you can't sort this out? Like, what is wrong with you?
That's such
and
a
he
shaming.
was totally, and he was
Because he
very
feels bad
chattery.
enough as it is.
Yes.
And I was sitting downstairs and I could hear, I know that tone of voice.
Oh, I know.
And I could hear it starting to escalate. And I thought, this is going to be one of those situations where my husband had flipped his lid.
Right.
Nobody was home anymore. He'd gone limbic and was now being emotionally reactive, which is going to become damaging to the relationship that he has with my boys. And so I just walked up the stairs, like, looking with this big smile. And I gave him the look, the look.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like,
And he had the good grace, with a few, swear words under his breath, to, like, exit stage left.
Right.
Because we've had lots of chats about that. And he happens to be in the same field as I am. So.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, when I see a therapist lose their shit, I'm like,
right?
this is not your time to lose it. This is what you do for a living.
That's right. But we've had conversations before how it's really important when you are activated, or same for me, because there are times that I also go off and need a little bit of a reset or a check. And that's part of how we partner each other, is that we check each other in those moments out of a place of love and respect for them and for our family and our children.
So in a case like that, where it's like a very sensitive, sort of more quiet child, but what do you do in a case like that? Like, what is the best way to kind of approach it?
Where she's done something wrong and her strategy is to cut and run, and she goes to isolation.
And then she doesn't particularly want to talk about it after whatever's happened. She internalizes and stays quiet.
Yeah. So the idea is that discipline has nothing to do with children and everything to do with adults. In that we must become disciplined in the way that we respond to our children's behavior. And so it really does shine a spotlight on our behavior in those moments, rather than,
highlighting that the child was disrespectful or whatever it is. And I think that there's something to be said for being really respectful. How old is your daughter now?
9.
Yeah. Oh, same. Being very respectful of our children's boundaries, just like you would any other human. You wouldn't go barging in if your husband's like, I need a minute.
Right.
You're going to give your husband a minute. And so if your child is saying, like, get out of my face, you're going to give them a minute because that's the loving thing to do. And that's very different from like a timeout, which we wouldn't recommend. We, the global we. And I would find a way to form a connection, even if they've gone to their room. So let's say she's been in her room for 5 minutes. You can come to the door and you can say, hey, darling, you can even have the door closed and just be speaking through it. It really seems like you want your own space right now. And then you sort of level up one. I think that's a brilliant idea.
Right.
So now you've taken it on. You've made it yours, and you've said, "I see you and I hear you so much that I'm like right there with you. And if you need some more time, you do that. I am nearby if you need, and you always end in connection. I'll be back in a few minutes just to check on you." I had this one dad years ago where they had a child who was doing that very thing around that age. And the child, because it's very vulnerable to then come out of your room, you have to sort of own up face to face with people that you behaved that way. And so lots of kids will go inward, and it takes them a long time, and it's hard for them. And so this dad, he got a pencil and a piece of paper, and he drew a little X's and O's grid and slid the pencil and the paper under the door. And they just started this ritual when the child would retreat that they would play a game under the door. So it took a little bit for the boy to then warm up and feel like he could re-enter. And then the conversation is never about you did it wrong. The conversation is about that was really hard for you.
Right.
And, the next time, and so you form a connection. I see you. I got you. I love you. And the next time you're really mad at mommy, or you really don't like what sister did, or whatever it is, you can still go to your room if that's what you feel like you need. And we're going to try and use our words rather than slam our doors or whatever.
Right.
Not that we think they're going to deliver on that. And that we do want to, because kids are full of good intentions, and we just want to honor that they have that in them. And so we say, can I count on you to give that a try next go? And then tomorrow, when it happens again, you can be like, it's really hard, right? I see you.
It's like society isn't, we were in Australia recently, and I remember being in Bondi Beach. I have a 4-year-old, 4.5-year-old, and a 9-year-old, and my 4.5-year-old had a full-on tantrum. She was going through a lot of emotions around that time, and she flung herself to the ground, and she was having this and then this woman came past me, and she goes, shh, to my kid. And I was like, keep it together, don't lose your shit, don't lose
Did
your
you
shit.
flare on the woman?
I didn't, but I said, she's a 4-year-old. This is neurotypical. I was very proud of myself. This is neurotypical. She's not a bad kid, or something like that. And then the woman was like, and she walked away. Because society has set us up so much for failure for parents, because we look at children who are yelling or screaming or hitting their sisters or whatever, and we're like, oh, they're bad kids. I saw this woman, and I'm like trying really not to judge people in my life right now, but like she was like, it's not going so well. But she was in Target, and she was like screaming at her 4-year-old, right? And I thought, dude, it is 7:30. The kid is 4.5. The kid is exhausted. You're in Target. Like, firstly, if you're gonna go in Target at 7:30, and you probably haven't, the kid's eating Doritos or whatever, kid's hungry. Right. This is your fault. Like, this is not your kid's fault. Like, you can't put your kids and set them up to fail and then be like, naughty kids. Like, I have a friend who's like, oh, my kid was like screaming after a birthday party, and so she's in her room now. And I didn't say anything because I don't like to parent other people's kids, but I was like, she just probably had all this cake. So overstimulated. She's young, and now she's in trouble.
Right.
Like, we have to teach them. And it's weird when I say I don't believe in punishment, because I don't believe in punishment. I believe in boundaries. I believe in solutions. I believe in talking through things, but I don't believe in punishing. And I don't know what it is about society. Like, people still hit their children. They still physically hit their children, and it's illegal to hit a dog, an elderly person, your spouse. I can't hit you guys in the studio, but a 4-year-old I can hit, and it's okay. It's legal.
Do you have a spanking law in the U.S.?
Oh, do you guys have one?
Oh, do you have one in Canada?
We have some in certain states, don't we?
We possibly do.
I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I think you can still hit your children in 2023 in the United States.
You can in Canada too. It's federal law if they're between the ages of 2 and 12, provided that you don't use a foreign object. You have to use your bare hand, and you have to hit between the head, like under the head. You can't hit anywhere on the head, and then you're fine.
Wow.
And it always is stunning to me that we still have that kind of a law. I think it comes from how historically we have viewed children. Like ideas like the original sin model, where you're born like guilty and sinful, and our job as the grown-ups is to purge you of all of that yuckiness and make you pure and whole, which sounds extreme, and that's kind of what forms the biases that we bring forward to our own children. The reality is, what we know from the science of child development, and in particular how the brain grows and develops, neurons that fire together wire together. And so we, instead of talking about punishment in present day, if we're going to be informed by what we know, and when we know better, we do better, we talk a lot more about the concept of co-regulation. And so when the 4-year-old is melting down in Target, the 4-year-old doesn't need to be punished. What the 4-year-old needs is to be regulated from the outside. In the brain is the only part of us that actually can be regulated from the outside. I can't regulate your kidneys, but I can regulate your brain. And the magic in terms of how that works is through the relationship, through the connection. So important is all of that we've given it a name. We've called it attachment in the research literature. People have lots of interesting ideas about what that word means. And when we can connect with our children in those moments when they're really dysregulated, what we do is we actually allow the cortical layers, the upstairs part of the brain, to sort of settle back in and take hold. And then they can think, and then they can reason, and then they can problem solve. But when they're lid flipped, those cortical layers are no longer working. 100%. Works for husbands very well.
Can we talk through some of the attachment styles? Because I myself feel like I don't know in depth, attachments, and then how that affects us as parents, Can we kind of go through the attachments?
Yeah. So John Bowlby, who was the father of attachment, with his student, who then became, in her own right, a very prolific researcher in that area, Mary Ainsworth, they came up with 4 different attachment styles. And
I think I know them.
I
wanted to see if I was right.
And the way that they did that is they created a laboratory experiment called the strange situation, where they put children in a room, a child with a parent, and then they went through a series of separations where they would pull the parent out of the room, and reunions where the parent would come back into the room. And they watched how the child reacted to the separations and to the reunions. So a secure attachment is when the parent leaves, the child notices, and depending on the child's temperament, if they're more intense and sensitive, they're going to have like a bigger reaction, and they're going to fall into these pursuit-seeking behaviors, which means they're going to cry, they're going to call after you, they're not going to be at rest, they're not going to be settled. And then when you come back into the room, you might see another little burst of that kind of stuff because you left me. And so you're going to pay for that for about 30 seconds. And then they will settle in, and they'll just be so regulated, co-regulated by the presence of the parent.
That's a secure attachment.
And that's a secure attachment, and it's the ideal situation. And it's interesting that in secure attachment, you don't have kids who are just sitting and happily billing. You have kids who are letting you know, like, this is not okay with me, because they have onboarded the understanding that you as the parent are their best bet. And in the absence of the connection, it freaks them out.
And what age is that?
Well, attachment begins...
Because my 9-year-old is like, see ya. I'm like,
Yeah.
my 4-year-old now she's okay if we go to dinner on Friday, like it's with the babysitter, the regular babysitter.
Yeah, so she has a relationship.
She's okay
and
with
she
her.
knows.
Yeah.
And like I'm 48 and I don't have that with my mom anymore.
Right.
Cry.
Right.
I feel like that would not be healthy.
And so as kids get older and they're more able to regulate themselves, you will see a lessening in those kinds of behaviors. It will reach its peak for your babies, probably around 10 months of age, give or take. And it'll be fairly persistent until somewhere around sort of 3-4 years of age, depending on temperament. But some kids can struggle with that kind of thing for longer, maybe because...
My eldest did.
Right.
So she's about 7 or 8.
Yeah,
actually.
so if they're very sensitive, you can imagine a sensitive brain intensity-wise is up here. So you have to actually develop a lot more, and it requires a lot more time before you can regulate around your levels of intensity if you're a really sensitive, intense kind of human. And so you can see it flare up in older kids too. And the tell will be that it's a shift in behavior, and now they're all, they're not able to go to school or separate from you at night to go to bed or whatever it is. And the answer to that is always going to be more connection so that we can reestablish that secure base and let them know we got you. And no matter where you are in the world, we're connected. So that's secure.
Okay.
That would be the ideal attachment style. If we were to all have our way with our lives, we would be in securely attached kind of frame of mind and then bring that to our own parenting because we do parent as we were parented. Then we have avoidant, or sometimes people call it avoidant anxious attachment.
Just kidding. I think she's avoidant. I'm anxious. Right? Is that kind of
It's like half and half, right?
I know. So we're great. She's avoiding. I'm anxious. We're like never really,
Great.
the two shall never meet. Perfect. How do we hear?
And the idea there is that the child and the parent are in the room. The parent leaves and the child just keeps playing.
Right.
So the child is avoiding acknowledging that this has happened. And when the parent comes back, same thing. Child just is carrying on with what they're doing. And if you were to take a little swab of their saliva or pluck out a root of their hair and analyze it chemically, you would see that they look cool as a cucumber on the outside, but internally they are freaking out.
Cortisol level is still high.
Cortisol levels are really, really high because that was very stressful. But what has that child learned over time? It serves them no purpose to kick up a fuss because nobody's coming anyways.
That's my, I know some people like that. It breaks my heart.
Then we move on to resistant attachment. Sometimes called avoidant resistant, which gets very confusing. And resistant attachment is a little bit all over the map. Usually it comes out of a parent-child relationship where the parent at times is very loving and very responsive and very available to the child, and at other times is really not. And so in my 20-some years of being in this field, I have seen that for parents who struggle with significant mental health kinds of issues, addiction, those kinds of things, where at times they can be really present, other times they cannot. This child is going to get loud when the parent leaves and get loud when the parent comes back and not settle. So the loudness is really loud because that child has learned, I don't know which parent is showing up today. And so in order to have my need met, I got to get loud and stay loud to keep you close to me. The final of the 4 is called disorganized attachment, and it's usually when a parent has very serious and unresolved trauma. So their pattern of interacting with their child is not a pattern. It's all over the map. You can't make sense of it. When I've seen it in front of my eyes in my career,
that's a rough one to
it's
do.
a rough one. I started out my career working in infant mental health, so 0 to 8 years of age was my category, alongside child protection. And so we saw a lot of that in that world. And it'll make the hairs on your neck stand up when you know what you're looking at. The child looks very disorganized in the way that they respond when the connection is severed, either in the strange situation or in real life. And they might laugh their heads off. They might masturbate. I had a little client once where that was the go-to response. So they're just very quizzical. You're just like, what is even happening?
Right.
And ironically, when we look at the interventions around restoring attachment to a secure kind of space, disorganized is one of the most open to change because you don't have to erase a story.
Right.
There isn't one. So you just get to begin writing it.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's fascinating.
What are these attachments? So we now know what they look like in small children, but what do they look like in adults? And how do we do it? Because I always thought I was codependent. When I was with my husband in my 20s, when he would leave and go and do his work, I would get a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think it was because when we immigrated from South Africa to Australia, you know, we had to start over, and I was in different houses and school, and my parents were very loving and very there, but I think I was always anxious about the stability part of it all. And so when my husband used to leave, he was my stability, right? And so I would get very overwhelmed, have panic, freak out. I obviously don't want to, you know, translate that for my kid, offer it up for her, but she's also an anxious kid too. So like, what does it look like in adults, and how can you try to not pass it on to your kids?
Yes.
Right?
And they're like the winning question.
Right.
Then I don't have to pay my
right.
therapist anymore. Thank you.
Yes. Again, it comes back to how do we not fuck our kids up,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The ultimate question.
Yes.
So if you can imagine the themes from those 4 attachment styles, and we'll really just talk about the first 3, because if you're disorganized as a grown-up, that's going to be an entirely different set of circumstances. You've probably been diagnosed with a personality disorder by that point, and so that'll be a whole different sort of intervention. So if we're looking at the anxious avoidant or the resistant attachment styles, think about thematically what that looks like for the child. So for the avoidant child, they're like nothing.
Right.
Nothing's up. So now you're in an adult relationship with your partner and you're having a fight. Who's getting the silent treatment? The resistant attachment style will kick up and get loud. And the other thing to bear in mind is it's a little bit on a continuum. Like we can have little pieces of other things within us, but on the whole, be generally healthy about how we're connecting in relationship. And if you think about the securely attached child, it's not that they don't get upset. It's that they can regulate eventually through the relationship.
Right.
As grown-ups, we are not meant to be regulated through the relationship, though it's really lovely when that can happen. We're meant to be regulated within ourselves.
And then we can regulate our kids.
You got it. You got it. So you as a grown-up, it's very different from childhood. You don't get it from the outside anymore. You're meant to have it on the inside and then bring that into the relationships that you have. So in that sense, it really only takes one person to have a really good relationship.
You said that one attack, because I worry about my eldest, because you said one of the attachment styles, the child doesn't know what they're going to get. And that's not really me. There's varying degrees of it. But sometimes I feel just had my period and I feel good and I'm centered and I've exercised and I've slept and I'm working and, you know, financially it's great. And then there's other times in my business where I feel out of control and I feel anxious and I feel emotional and I'm pre-period. So I fear that like maybe she doesn't know if I'm going to be the let's take care of it. I love you. I'm here for you. Or what did you do? I can't believe you did that. And then, but is that just, are we putting too much perfectionism and weight on like what we're doing wrong? Or is that pretty normal?
Should we talk about that?
Parents, do all parents do that? Do all parents kind of like, not, I mean, we're not great all the time.
Yeah. And nature would never have been fool enough to create children, human children, so sensitive and so open to damage and wounding that they couldn't tolerate like a human being as a parent who's going to have like a moment every now and then. And there's really good news in all of this. So Edward Tronick, so there was John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Another big name in the attachment field is Edward Tronick, who's out of Harvard, and developed a different paradigm. See, Bowlby had separations happening like physical, where the parent physically left the room. And Edward Tronick was like, that's cool and all, but let's create a paradigm where the parent emotionally leaves the room.
Right.
So it's called the still face.
Okay.
And that's when he puts the baby and the parent or the child and the parent in a face-to-face interaction. They're instructed to play as they normally would for 2 minutes. And then the parent turns their face away, wipes it of emotion, and then turns back with this like frozen.
Empty look, kind of.
Empty.
Oh, wow.
And you can see, I have a video of a 3-month-old in that situation. And 3-month-old, like they don't say, oh, where'd you go? That's making me really anxious. So the baby, you'll see it in their bodies. He started tonguing, where babies are kind of like rooting and tonguing to look for something to soothe them. And then the little body started to go and he turned his head and threw up all within 30 seconds. So kids know right away what's going on in the moment. The idea is, as Tronic so eloquently put, and then just so you know, the parent comes back with their warm face now. The connection is reestablished. And again, they're looking at the reactivity of the child. What they have figured out is that in the most ideal, most optimal, most healthy relationships, parents and children are only in sync around the connection 30% of the time.
Wow, that's a small number.
And he said, so valuable for us to understand that the majority of the relationship is playing out over here. So if this is connection, we fall out of connection, and then we find our way back into connection. 70% is about rupture and repair. And the idea is that all of that is just fine for our children. When it's not fine is we fall out of connection and there's no move made to repair. If that's happening on repeat, then that's what becomes damaging to the child. The rest of it is how we grow and learn to understand relationships and learn to understand or develop the capacity for adaptation and resilience. And so all of that's lovely. 30%. You just got to hit 30. We call it being the good enough parent.
Good enough parent. Just
have to be
barely
good
skimming
enough.
the
I'm at
surface.
60, so we're good. I've only screwed her up 40%.
Perfect.
So what do, especially like Tammin and I have these girls that are going into their preteens, right? It's starting, like little signs are starting now. Like we can kind of feel it. How do we maintain this connection with our girls and really kind of make us be the safe spaces, keep that, going for them as they approach these years that can be so chaotic and so crazy? Tell us some techniques that we can do.
I'm afraid we're going to lose them.
Yes.
Too,
Yes.
right? And that's the biggest fear I think a lot of mothers of 9-year-olds, because they're going through. I'm noticing she's, we're talking about bras and things like that. And I have a 4-year-old that still wants to snuggle. But I'm afraid we're going to lose them. Yeah. And I know that's the biggest fear. And it's like, what if they never come back to us?
What do we do?
Yeah. So start there. Start there with acknowledging the fear and wondering where the fear comes from. Because it's not new. It's very familiar. And it will come from something within your own childhood that your now child on the outside of you is bringing up for the child on the inside of you.
Right.
And so that's the first part of the formula. The second part is to really know where kids are at and why. So when you're a preteen and you're about to launch into adolescence, there's this whole process of individuation that's playing out all the time for our children. But at that point in time, you can imagine that your children are increasingly moving forward to, and hold on to yourselves for a second, forward to adulthood, where they're gonna both feet are into being their biggest best person, and they're figuring out how to make their mark on the world and live loud and be who it is that they are. And in the preteens and teen years, they have one foot in that world and one foot where your 4-year-old is, and they're like, I don't know. They're stuck sort of in this in-between world, and there's a lot of dysregulation that can come up for them around that. The other thing is, and there's a beautiful book written by Dan Siegel, who's an interpersonal neurobiologist.
You just wanted to say that on the podcast.
Don't you love
You're
it?
like, I'm smart.
Podcasts and cocktail parties. That's the one I brought.
She knows what she's talking about.
He's actually a psychiatrist and really understands the inner world of that attachment piece in children. And he wrote a book about teens called Brainstorm, which is a gorgeous read because it describes to you what's happening inside this adolescent brain. It's like it's inverting itself.
Right.
And it has to live intensely, which means like highs are really high and lows are really low, because during this period of time, you actually have to chew on all these kind of existential sorts of issues, and it freaks you out. And so you need to be able to have this sort of very warpy way of looking at the world for a few years until you come to terms with what the endless universe is all about and how that circles back to you and who is it that you're meant to be in this thing called life. So that's why the reactions get especially big. our job as parents is to not become afraid of that. And you can take a Q-tip, you know, Q-tips.
Stick it in your eyeball.
Yeah. Many times.
Because sometimes that's how I feel parenting. Is it's less painful to stick a Q-tip in my eyeball than parent a 9-year-old.
Yeah, I can see.
Just
you know. The Q-tip stands for quit taking it personally. Your child's reaction has nothing to do with you. So, like, stuff a Q-tip in your bra or in your pocket. Hold on.
Yeah.
And remember, this isn't about you. This is about them being perfectly 9. Aren't you so grateful that you have a very typical child who gets to be perfectly 9? And the final layer around adolescence is because they are moving towards full individuation and full independence as a grown-up. They are meant to step away. And sometimes, in order for the step away to happen, they have to push. And so they get loud and get in your face and like drop you like it's hot. And then you're left as the parent to deal with your own attachment style while your kid is abandoning you, right?
Right, but they're not.
They're not.
For now.
No.
Unless we are not a great parent.
Well, I think, you know, you may feel like they are. My boys are 16 and 19. I never had girls. And what I've watched over time is they want to stretch into becoming their own selves. And they circle back in ways that are just like so rich and so incredible to witness as a parent.
But
and
look at you as the mom. Like, you got your
know.
shit together.
She's
Like, I don't know. I think that if I was your kid, I'd be like, I'm circling back. She's cool. But I think my kid's like, my mother. But it's so true. Like, we do take it. So, I mean, my biggest issue is just learning how to love myself, which has always been my North Star, and it's getting so much better, and I'm in such a better place.
Yeah.
Learning to love myself and realize it's because there is some narcissistic tendencies that we have as parents too. We always think it's about us, right? It's like my kid's acting like that because it's all about, well, I did this or what I did wrong. So there's like all these things about like we make it all about us because you know, it's hard because you want your kid to make the right decisions. You want them to say, no, I'm not going to get in the speeding car. No, I'm not going to take those drugs. No, I'm not going to make the bad decisions. But then it's like you want to put boundaries on them and not punish them. But my biggest question now is like, how do we put limits and boundaries on things that are dangerous without losing that connection, but without going, you know, you're going to get your pocket money taken away because you did this, because it doesn't make any sense to them. So how do I teach my kid to not take the drugs? Roxy can take them. No, just kidding.
More for everybody else.
But how do we get our kids to not do that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how do we get them to make right decisions without punishing them for the bad?
Or scaring them too much, right?
Yeah, because you want to parent with love. You don't want to parent with fear.
Yeah.
And that's really, really important. And when we understand our job, when we're being respectful parents, conscious parents, attachment-centered parents, is to step in with love, with an equal balance of firm and kind. So it's not that you have to be like, oh, like never upset them and never say no and never do those. You need to do that. If you didn't do that, it would be like asking them to drive across this, like the bridge of life with no guardrails on it. That would be terrifying for them. And so you really want to make sure that you are a balance of firm and kind, and understand. The same as for us as adults, we are inspired and motivated and desire to do the bidding of another human when we feel close and connected to them. So when connection is high, resistance will be low. But it's like a teeter-totter. When connection is low, resistance will be high. And so for my children, the idea is to parent from the space of connection. And we talk about what the rules are and how that's all meant to play out. And I really have never had a problem with keeping curfew or, you know, following the rules that we've set forward as a family. And if there is a bobble every now and then what I do as a parent is I come back to myself and I think, okay, I overestimated what it was that my child could handle. And so now it's time to move the bar higher or move the bar lower, depending on the situation, so that my child is not set up to fail. Let's say it's around, you know, curfews, particularly on nights when we go to beach parties. Why would I pick that example?
How many beach parties are you going to?
I know. Can we come?
Here, where's that invite?
Right? And so if that's going to be a challenge, then there's new parameters set forward around how we do beach party nights. Because the issue is not necessarily something I'm going to pin on my kid. What my kid learns from that is that my mom sees me and hears me and gets me. It's not unreasonable. He is very connected. They both are. And so they desire to fall into line. They don't want to resist that. And by and large, they're generally easy. I think I've said this about every stage of their lives. I loved them as babies. Like, oh my God, did I ever love that phase? And I loved them as crazy little toddlers and all of the things. And I loved the adolescent years and am loving them because the power of that connection piece is so brilliant. And remember, I mean, just because I do what I do doesn't mean it's perfect in my house. I lose my shizzle and yell and do all of the things. I got divorced. That wasn't fun for them. It wasn't the 5 years leading up to that. Certainly wasn't a good time.
Right.
My son is in the car with me the other day, the one that's 16 now, and he's like, you know, Mom, I've realized I really didn't have a very good childhood. I was like, please can you never tell anybody that asks you
Right.
about
Can you
that?
extrapolate?
You're like, you will ruin my business right now.
He's like, yeah, that wasn't very fun being from a broken home.
You're like,
I was like, who says it's broken? It's just reconfigured.
yeah, right.
Right.
You're like, we just need to reframe it.
That's right.
So what do we say to our kids? Because this is also the time going into these preteen years when they are seeking approval from their peers,
Yeah.
especially. And the cliques are coming up and they want to be in this clique or that clique, or they feel like they're not accepted in this group or that group. And there's like, you know, this person likes me, this person doesn't like me. Like, how do we kind of, you know, deal with that when when their peer approval is so high right now?
You should have had boys.
I know.
Yeah.
That's what
There's
they
this.
say.
And I was gonna say, and should you pick their friends? Because we're actually gonna move my kid's school because I think that she's not happy there anyway. But her friendship group is pulling her into things that I know is not her. And we're gonna go to a different school that learns differently. And the kids are lovely. No social media. That's cool.
So how do we do that?
Yeah, you know, there's a brilliant book written by Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate called Hold On to Your Kids, Why Parents Need to Matter More Than Peers. And the thesis around all of that really comes out of the attachment literature, looking at who is meant to be our child's North Star. It's meant to be us.
Right.
And it's not that we can protect them from the frenemies and the drama and the whatever. And it is that we can buffer them through the relationship. And so when the child is oriented to us, the kid over here can be mean and nasty and saying all the things, exclusionary, those kinds of things. But the child is feeding from this connection. And so we'll be able to weather the storm. It doesn't mean they won't be sad and hurt by it, but they'll be able to weather that storm because they've got such a rich source of connection that is their North Star source. So it's not the central source. When kids are, and it's tricky because the way that we set our world up for our young children, they're finding themselves increasingly in these homogenous groups of same-aged peers, you know, sometimes from very, very young. And so it's almost like we push them into each other's faces and they start to parent each other rather than looking to the parent to be their parent. The idea is before adolescence, you want to make sure that that's what you have developed with your child. And it's not that it's ever too late. It's just that the later you leave it, the longer and steeper the climb will be to restoring it. So that as they're making those decisions, they always remember where it is that they've come from and what it is that actually matters, which is the connection back to you.
Wow.
So it kind of goes back to the lessons you've already taught them. In other words, instead of like them looking to a friend or like another peer for that kind of approval.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can think of it also in the sense that, you know, when things go wrong or stuff is heating up and your kid's like, I don't know what to do, which they find themselves in those situations when they're at beach parties or wherever. They find themselves in those situations. And think about it that you want your child's blink instinct to be, call mom, she will know what to do, as opposed to, oh my God, don't ever let mom find out. I can't be in trouble for this. And so whatever you do in your parenting, have it lead to that.
Right. And I always say to my daughter, if anything happens, and you're scared, call me, and I'm not going to ask questions if you don't want me to. I will come pick you up.
Yeah.
No
I've said
matter
that a
what.
million times, but what you said true, and I think what we should end on is connection and resistance. The connection is high, the resistance is low, and I think that that's so true. If our kids are acting up, it's because the connection is low, or something's going on where they don't feel safe enough to talk, or they feel like they are confused and scared. And so hopefully whoever's listening, I hope that this has helped someone, some father out there. Just
Yeah,
kidding. No, just kidding.
some dads.
No, just kidding.
No.
Dads are great. We love dads.
Yeah, but that's what you worry about, right? With bullying, especially, with
Yes.
these kids, you want your connection with them to be high.
Right.
And I'm assuming you kind of teach them that it's not that they can only kind of worry about themselves in that moment, right? It's not about changing the bully. Is
Yeah.
that right? Like,
Yeah.
is it?
It's more about hanging on to yourself.
Okay.
And when my son was being bullied, I gave him this line: what does that tell you about that other child? What do you know about them that this is how they choose to do it? And it has nothing to do with you at all. It really is just about coming back to that relationship, and to also not weaponize that against yourself. Because if your kid's really upset, then you're like, God, I messed it all up.
I know.
Like if I have this,
Right.
because the thing is, the connection will be what restores them. And children look to us as their big people, as their ultimate protectors. So when anything goes wrong in their life, whether you had anything to do with it or not, it's your fault because
Right.
you're the ultimate protector, right?
Right.
And so to not take it personally, to have the Q-tip in your pocket at all times so you can be tangibly reminded of that, and to step in with power and grace in all of the situations that present an opportunity for you to respond with relationship rather than punishment.
And you can always use a Q-tip to clean out your ears.
Yeah. Sure.
Right? Dual
Double purpose.
My husband's like, I can't hear you. I'm like, well, here's a Q-tip
Yeah.
to clean out your ears.
Clean it.
So handy.
Yeah.
You can clean out your brain and your ear.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad we saw you in person, even though you thought I was shorter than I was. First thing Vanessa said was like, "You're short." No, just kidding. She said you're smaller.
You're so
Yes.
little.
Yes.
I don't know if that's good or bad, but
I love it.
She also confirmed that, in fact, I am an inch taller than you.
I always knew you were. But I can fit in small places if I ever need to get around. But we hope we see you again. We hope we can
Likewise.
continue. and
Yes.
You can always be our expert, our
Yes.
parenting expert, and enjoy
Awesome.
Australia. Have you been there before?
I have been there 2 or 3 times. I was there last time, though, just as the pandemic broke out. And I had to
Okay.
hurry scurry back on a plane and come home. So I'm excited to go back. And I
I'll
just
send
can't
you all
wait.
the
Yes.
restaurant
Awesome.
recommendations.
Yes. And do tell us about those Aussie men. I mean, I know we're all married here, but, never hurts to look.
I will let you know.
I'm sure her husband will be really impressed with you, Roxy. He'll be like, no friends with that Roxy girl. Like he's ixnay on the Roxy A. My husband said that to me all the time. Here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. Where can people find you if they are new to the podcast, or where can they find you?
Yeah, DrVanessaLapointe.com is my website. All of the information about my books and everything else is there. And I'm pretty active on social media. So Dr. Vanessa Lapointe with an E on the end.
Do you do all your social media, by the way? Because we're thinking of outsourcing, but we're like, let's ask people what they do. You have a company who puts it
I have a
together.
guy.
Oh.
And I'm telling
Give us
you.
your guy.
You might have to
He is-
process along your guy.
He's like, no, it's my guy.
magical.
Yeah.
He's magical, and the best part about him is his heart is like as big as the universe, and so that's when you see the videos he puts together. He's just so
incredible.
good. Yeah,
Well, thanks,
he's
guys.
Australian. Well, he's not Australian, but I met him.
Well, let's just say he's Australian.
Australian.
Thank you guys so much. We're Women on Top Official on Instagram.
And Women on Top podcast on Facebook and Women on Top Official on TikTok.
And don't forget to rate, subscribe, and comment. I am Temma Sirsog.
And I am Roxy Manning.
And this is...
Dr. Vanessa Lapointe.
And we are Women on
Top!